We have the great pleasure to work with Madam President of CSAC, Supervisor Leticia Perez from Kern County, who has boundless energy and keeps us focused on fighting as strong as possible on behalf of counties. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a round of applause and an introduction for Leticia Perez.
Not long ago, my office was alerted to what I would come to see as a real human crisis occurring right down the street from my house. We have, on what is sort of a skid row for Kern County in my district, a whole slew of really cheap hotels. And on the outside, they look relatively livable. I was unaware of what the conditions were inside. But through our health department, it was brought to my attention that there were families here, young children, and that the place was sort of third world status, if you will. We went in, we investigated, and found that there were a couple of hundred people here, ranging from senior citizens to infants, that were covered in bed bug bites. They were living in rat and roach infested quarters. And they were all adjudicated under the Social Security system. They all got $950 a month that went straight through their third-party financier right to the slumlord. And it was perfectly financed, perfectly in the shadows of Kern County, and it was 1 mile from my house. We came in thinking we were the heroes of the operation, shut it down, kicked everybody out. It was, of course, wildly chaotic in a way there's no words for, with the animals and clothing that had been infested with bed bugs, and you name it, every complication under the sun. I returned the day after we cleared the place out to find that many of these people had slept in the alleyway that night. And that many of the places that we had sent them to, right along the street, the same skid row, to be housed in a better hotel, were in even worse conditions of the place that we had sent them from. That was a stunning and eye-opening experience for me, because I discovered through that process that took us about a year to get some good resolution, that there were really no units to send them to. And these were people with monthly incomes. We know they could be a stable source of income for an owner, and still this remarkable, remarkable tragedy. This issue is complicated in a way that none of us can pretend to fully understand or have a real pathway forward. We must join forces at every level and use our best innovation, creativity, and put your private sector thinking, if you will, to solve what is a human crisis now of absolute inescapable proportions. According to the League of Cities in California, we house 1 of every 4 homeless people in the United States of America. If you incorporated counties and rural areas, I imagine that number would even be higher, frankly. And so this is our problem. It is our time to lead on an issue that is of actual human crisis to real people, to children, to animals who become victims of this process, and many, many good people who need some real help and need government to, frankly, be much better and much more righteous than we've ever been in addressing a human crisis. With that said, California is home to 21 of the 30 most expensive rental markets in the nation, and the state does not have enough affordable housing stock to meet the demand of low-income households. The state's 2.2 million extremely low-income and very low-income renter households compete for 664,000 affordable rental homes. In Kern, we have a 10-year waiting list. We don't even add people anymore. It isn't even worth the time to add your name to a list. Our experience with homelessness shows that there is not just one path into homelessness. Similarly, we know that there is also no single path to reducing the number of homeless and unsheltered people in our communities. We have an excellent panel for you this morning. It includes representatives from counties that have taken 2 different approaches to addressing and working on the homelessness issues. I asked my panelists, please start with a brief introduction of yourself. We'll start with San Bernardino County Supervisor James Ramos, then Tom Hernandez, San Bernardino County's Homeless Service Officer, and then we'll get the opportunity to hear from Orange County. You may have heard of some recent challenges Orange County is having. Is highly publicized and quite tragic. We'll hear from the Homeless Service Officer, Orange County Director of Care Coordination, Susan Price. We will take questions, of course, after the panelists present, but for now, let's get right to the good stuff. Supervisor Ramos, floor is yours.
Thank you. And is it brief comments or going into the presentation from
Tell
the
us a
county?
little about yourself and your thoughts on this issue as we then get into questions. But for now, brief introduction.
All right, thank you. Yeah, San Bernardino County Board of Supervisor James Ramos. Homelessness here in San Bernardino County is a topic that's really has the full Board of Supervisors support and working together in collaboration and making it a directive within all the different departments here in San Bernardino County. We continue to work together with law enforcement, behavioral health, housing authority, Veterans Administration here at the local level and at the state and federal areas. We've been able to bring everybody together so that we're utilizing the resources that we go out and we receive so that we don't see the silo effect happening, that everybody's working towards that common goal that's there. The Board of Supervisors did take a direction. We had a study session. And we've moved forward in first identifying subpopulations such as the homeless veterans, being able to bring resolve to that and started that. And today we've been able to house over 1,000 homeless veterans using that model that was created when the board first moved forward. Now we're tackling chronic homelessness that includes homeless youth and now homeless women on the streets with children here in San Bernardino County. Using the subpopulation theory here starts to tie the funding to what's available at the federal government and state, also with housing authorities, some of those things that are coming away. And hopefully a little bit later we'll be able to dive a little bit deeper into these topics, but that's just a brief overview of what it is we're going to be talking about.
Thank you. Tom Hernandez, Homeless Service Officer, San Bernardino County.
Thank you, everyone. Hello. Can everyone hear me?
Speak up a tad. Maybe bring it closer.
Let me bring it close.
Thank you.
All right. Tom Hernandez, Homeless Services Officer with the County of San Bernardino, Community Development and Housing Agency, Office of Homeless Services. A little bit about me. I've been with the county for about 25 years, and I served in a number of capacities. The majority of that was in public health, and almost for the last decade, I have worked with homeless services. Our office is the lead office for the continuum of care for our region. As many of you know, California, almost every single county is a continuum of care, except for Los Angeles, which I believe has 4 continuums of care because there's Long Beach, Glendale, and Pasadena are broken out into their own. So what my particular position is, we work closely with what we call the Homeless Partnership, and it's made up of a wide variety of groups. Because as Supervisor Ramos mentioned earlier, we cannot get anything done individually. We can't get anything done as a government by ourselves, as a organization by ourselves, as nonprofits, faith-based organizations. We need a partnership of a number of different factors. So our office serves as the lead office for the continuum of care, which provides administrative support to our governing board, which is the Interagency Council on Homelessness, as well as the Homeless Partnership Provider Network, which is made up of about over 200 community-based and faith-based organizations in San Bernardino County that work together to collectively solve homelessness. So that's a little bit about me.
Excellent. We'll get to some details in a few moments. Thank you so much. Now we have Orange County Director of Care Coordination, Susan Price. You have homelessness on the mind, unlike many other people. And we really do have incredible, we appreciate or have some appreciation of how serious the situation that you're in. We, of course, do not envy you, but are watching you very closely. And we have an incredible amount of graciousness towards what you're experiencing, but boy, all eyes are on you. Your thoughts?
Well, thank you. No pressure at all.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. I want to say that I've spent 25 years on the issue of homelessness from a multi-sector approach in healthcare, looking at criminal justice, affordable housing, and homelessness, and the intersection of those. I am well prepared and equipped to manage what is happening in Orange County. So your prayers are welcome, but I look forward to sharing with you what we've learned, what we've gained, and how this is going to help all of us in our better response to homelessness in the state of California. Just want to make a couple of comments that I come from the city of Long Beach, where we managed for 14 years, built a system of care that has become a very well-oiled machine and a best practice really across the country. We have a lot of best practices in Long Beach. I've got a colleague here from my days in Long Beach, Jeff Reeb, from the fire department. But I mean, we made a significant dent in homelessness in Long Beach because of the Military Base Realignment and Closure Act. That was a significant opportunity for us there. Within the counties, though, you know, we've got our Mental Health Services Act, we've got AB 109, and the convergence of all of these things, they need to be integrated. We're not going to solve this by just addressing housing. There are, as was mentioned, a lot of complexities to the issue of homelessness, and there's no one tributary. And I'll say in closing to my introduction that California is dealing with some things that the other states in our nation are not exactly dealing with. Some of the key indicators are, number one, the correctional reform, the Prop 47, Prop 57 impacts to our communities are shifting the narrative and the compassion fatigue on the issue of responding effectively to homelessness. And then I will say that the redevelopment, the loss of redevelopment has slowed down our progress with affordable housing development, and really our cities have been unable to effectively respond as a result of that loss. So I know we've got some state legislation coming out to assist us. It's going to be imperative that we prepare ourselves to respond effectively in that climate. There will be more, I'm sure, on the federal lawsuit. I'm sure you'd like to get an update on that. So
I am
I'm prepared to share that with
very
you.
pleased you are here, Susan. This is timely and excellent. Tom Hernandez, Homeless Service Officer, San Bernardino County. What does San Bernardino get that other places aren't getting, you think? What can we learn from what you have done and your approach? Give us the big picture of the philosophical bent by which you have had the successes that you're having and how you're thinking about the issues.
Well, that's actually a very complicated answer. Sam, we got here over years of reaching out with the communities, working with our cities, working with our nonprofit organizations. I think initially this started back in 2007 when the Board of Supervisors actually created the Office of Homeless Services to serve as the lead agency for the continuum of care. And they were tasked with doing one thing, reaching out to the community, reaching out to everybody who was out there providing homeless-related services, to come together and determine what we need collectively as a community that would solve the issues in our county. That sort of coincided at the same time with President Bush's initiative, a homeless initiative. He had also created the Interagency Council on Homelessness for the entire nation, and they actually drafted something called Opening Doors, which was a strategic plan to deal with homelessness in the nation. So we sort of modeled that in San Bernardino County. We went out, there was probably, I want to say, over 300 different organizations that actually helped us develop our strategy to address that. And that took several years, and several years of putting everything together. Before we actually developed this, we used to have a homeless coalition in San Bernardino County. The homeless coalition was made up mostly of nonprofits who sort of managed the continuum of care funding, which is funding available to the region from HUD. And generally, they would vote for themselves to get the money, and so there was not necessarily too much oversight. What we ended up doing is getting their input, getting them as part of the group, and then of course with the county's backing, and then of course reaching out to our cities, we're able to develop the plan. The plan actually called for the creation and formation of our partnership, which had a governing board that was made up with a wide variety of representatives, and I think this is what actually sort of helped move us in the right direction. We had 2 members of our Board of Supervisors that were appointed to this governing board. We call it the Interagency Council on Homelessness for San Bernardino County. We also had 7 cities out of our 24 incorporated cities that were also members of that board. And then key personnel from throughout the county government and throughout the area that we knew would be key players in moving us forward. Probation, parole services, the sheriff, many of our faith-based and community-based organizations, our local 211, our community action partnership, all of that we wanted to make sure we brought to the table to serve as our governing board. And then we would sort of transition the Homeless Coalition to what we called our provider network, and they would serve as the advisory board to the decision makers. As a result of that, I think we slowly have been able to work together, start breaking down the silos between organizations. As many of you know, it's very difficult for one agency to try to supersede another, so we don't do that. We collectively work together. And I think one of the benefits from that key point back in 2009 when our board adopted that strategic plan and we've been able to move, the actual annual renewal demand for San Bernardino County at the time was probably less than $2 million of HUD funding that would come to the region in order to provide housing assistance. Since then, we've managed to increase that to over $10 million within that manner of years, and that's because of the collaborations and partnerships that we've had with everybody. And then also recently we had the county taking up a vision process, and that vision process was essential because not only did it tie in to what we were trying to do as a partnership, but it also tied into what the county was trying to do in actually moving us forward. One of the key structures that we always have is we envision a sustainable system of high quality education, community health, public safety, housing, retail, recreation, arts and culture, and infrastructure in which development complements our natural resources and environment. And that's really the emphasis of what we're trying to do with the partnership. We started out small. We got the right players to the table. We've developed a master list, and I know Supervisor Ramos is going to go into detail more on that, but it was a sort of an infancy growth and challenge, and we've luckily managed to evolve into something I think that's been beneficial for our area.
Outstanding. Supervisor Ramos, can you tell us more about that?
So based on the collaboration and what's been going on in San Bernardino County, I think having the political will and the full support of the Board of Supervisors moving forward serves in its role. And roles are important to understand, as Mr. Hernandez was talking about. Being able to lead the way as far as giving the imperatives of everybody coming together, but then knowing when electeds should be in this role and letting those that understand the topic be able to move forward and bring promise and resolve to those issues that are there. San Bernardino County, you know, homelessness affects all of us, and it's more of a humanitarian problem as much as it is a public health crisis in our area and throughout the region. But one of the things that the board has done of how to deal with the homelessness, because homelessness is large, it's a big area, but when you start to look at subpopulations, we've been able to have resolve in those subpopulations, starting with the homeless veterans. We've been able to look at that subpopulation that I talked a little bit about in the opening. And in 2005, when we put that together to bring all the different departments together to focus on homeless veterans as that subpopulation, we've been able to bring resolve to that. When we first started that initiative in 2015, we identified over 401 homeless veterans that year. And by Thanksgiving of that year, we had 100% of them in some type of housing. And since that time to where we are today, we've been able to successfully use that model to house close to 1,000 homeless veterans here in San Bernardino County, showing that targeting the subpopulations and tying it to the funding that's available, so you start to have some resolve to those issues that are there in the beginning. Now, targeting chronic families with youth, because youth is a big factor that we also see in our community. If we could actually start to engage in the homeless youth, that aspect of it, we see that that would be some resolve to the larger homeless population that's there. And when I talk about bringing collaboration with all of the facets of San Bernardino County, law enforcement is one that actually is part of it. We're a team, it's called Hope Team, that's here on the streets that goes out and talks to the homelessness, talking about the resources that are available in San Bernardino County. Not putting them up against the wall and running everybody's name for all these things, but genuinely giving them the support and letting them know the services that are there. But also, again, with the support of the county sheriff, that program, there's another program, SART, that starts in the actual county jails before people are released, to let them know the resources that are available, so that we're a little bit more proactive in addressing those issues that are there. I think one of the big things in tackling that we've been successful in and sharing with other counties is tackling the subpopulations that's tied to the funding that comes from the federal or state government, that we're able to have a better resolve of the resources that are coming our way. And so as we continue to look at those areas, we see that the collaboration and breaking down those silos within the departments served its purpose. And again, the political will of each one of our organizations needs to be able to work in collaboration and know the roles that we all have. Our CEO, Gary McBride, works closely with the Board of Supervisors, with the different departments. So we come together to work at these things, and collaboration is one of the areas of how we're being able to bring resolve to some of these issues. And as I mentioned earlier, we targeted this year unaccompanied homeless women. And this year, in the point in time count, we did a special focus on that to bring some more of that awareness and some more of that information to the agency, Council on Homelessness, so that we could better understand, work with the providers, work with all those that are there in a room similar to this that meets once a month. So we come around the table, and everybody's dedicated to trying to be able to resolve and use the resources in areas that we need to. Part of that comes from working together in a $5 million grant a year from the Inland Empire Health Plan came forward to the county to house IEHP eligible members. So that $5 million could have been used in a silo, but yet it's now part of this whole collaboration of everybody working together, so we could actually better service the homeless population here in San Bernardino County. And you know, a lot of these things that we're sharing are issues that work: collaboration, utilizing the department, the political will, such as here as a Board of Supervisors, calling on all departments to work together to tackle these issues. That's important to move forward. But also things that didn't work. Our housing search, as was mentioned earlier, was scattered among agencies. And in order to fix this, we needed a centralized housing search that came together to start to look at if those were coming and want to get the services that are there. We need to find the housing. We need to find these things for people to be able to move into. And so, you know, we'd like to discuss a little bit further about that, but knowing, you know, our role as the elected, and then giving direction to Tom Hernandez and the different organization. I think, Tom, you could talk a little bit more about how we came to means on that.
Sure. Thank you, Supervisor Ramos. In terms of housing search and stability, one of the big issues is when the Board of Supervisors adopted several initiatives. The first initiative was the Veterans Initiative in 2015, which was to house at least 401 veterans by the end of 2015. And then, of course, 2016, chronically homeless, 2017 with a focus, also with a focus on youth, and then 2017, unaccompanied women who are chronically homeless. What we ended up doing is we had various groups that worked together, the actual providers themselves that were providing the services, and they came across many impediments. So we have funding sources, we have a way to pay for the rental assistance, but how do we move forward when we are up against an obstacle or roadblock? The board actually created an advisory board that was led by our county CEO, and I believe it's still led by Mr. McBride in the back, to basically resolve the impediments that we came up with. So we had a master list. We have everybody at the table, and we all do master case conferencing on everything. One of the things that there was difficulty was identification of availability of housing. As we know, housing development is a hot commodity in California, and so we needed to address that. Every agency had its own independent housing navigator. But you have to remember, a lot of agencies, a lot of them work on very limited budgets. So a housing navigator is also serving as a case manager, also serving as part office assistant. So all of that, we wanted to make sure we broke that and separated that task. So through the advisory board, we looked at reallocating some of our continuum of care funds that were going to our coordinated entry system, as well as investing some of the county emergency solutions grant funds to create a group of individuals that would serve as a housing search and placement and stability program for the entire county. We call it the HIP squad. It just sounds nice when you say HIP squad. It's housing identification and placement. So that was essentially a group of people who were not going to serve as case managers, who were not going to be really dealing with the idea of providing direct services to those who are without housing. It was to identify and cultivate landlord resources that were available, not just landlords, individual mom and pop landlords, but of course some of the larger project developments. And so they actually hired real estate agents to do this. So when we're dealing a lot with homeless crisis and issues, we have many clients. One of the clients are those who are without housing, that's true. But another client we have to deal with also are landlords, because we need to be providing both service for both. And so in separating that function, we were able to maximize the amount of identification of units that would complement what the housing programs were identifying. So a lot of the housing programs said, this is great, dandy, we have tons of money for rental assistance, we can't find the units. Well, now you create an organization whose sole purpose is to find the units and communicate that back to the providers. And then, of course, to work with them in any which way. So that actually benefited. On average, I believe it's Inland Housing Solutions, which is one of the agencies that was cultivated to do this. They find anywhere between 30 to 60 units of available units, most of them one bedroom, by the way, and everyone says one bedrooms are like impossible to find. We found that, and one bedroom are not impossible to find. There are tons of them out there. And so they have the units, so all they have to do is then connect that to the agency. So the agency doesn't have to do that, manage that landlord cultivation. That's being done separately. And all the agency then has to worry about is making sure that you place that person into housing, have a housing plan in place, and then connect them and make sure they have the supportive wraparound services to keep them in their housing and make them self-sustainable.
Thank you, Tom. Just one more comment, Madam President. And finding the housing is something that's important, because once you're able to go out and do the outreach and you get people that are willing to come in and partake of the resources, and then you go out to try to find a place for them to live, and trying to find landlords that have places that are available that are open to accommodating people in that particular situation has been challenging. And so much so, when I talk about the political will of electeds, it's about then knowing when to engage. A situation that we've been in for the homeless veterans here in our area, we moved forward, we started looking at trying to find places, and they were far and in between. So we worked together with the funding that we had through the Housing Authority and some of the different departments, and moved forward on a development out in a local city. I won't name the city, but it was like between 60 to 80 units that was being moved, and the majority of them were going towards homeless veterans. That moved forward. There was public outreach to it for over 18 months. Then when it got to the city council level, there was so much uproar and opposition to it that it was pulled off the agenda. So when I talk about political will, at that point, everything could have just dropped. But because we're so much engaged here at the county level, we led the efforts of opinion pieces, going out there and speaking on the importance of how this needed to be done. Then it came back to the council again under a negative declaration, and the council voted on a 3-2 to support it. And then the second reading, it was unanimous support. So it's not just bringing up these issues as an elected leader and setting the guidance for it. It's actually the will of the political climate to stand with you through every facet of trying to get people to a safe environment and to a safe place to live. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, San Bernardino. Orange County, Susan Price, enlighten us, please.
Okay, how much time do I get? All right, I'm going to start at the beginning, and I'll talk quick and try to hit the high points. I came to the County of Orange knowing of its problems. People ask me, why did you go down there? I went down there because I felt like I would be a good person to help them solve what was happening down there. So the Board of Supervisors was very proactive in creating the position, the Director of Care Coordination, and housing it in the CEO's office. It's a very smart move. For every county in the room here, I highly recommend that for a couple of reasons. I know that Riverside's got a recruitment out right now. I was joking earlier, it looks very appealing as a parachute for myself should I land hard in the next month or so. But I will say to you, I've been working with your counties for over 10 years in my career from Long Beach. We have a regional COC Alliance leadership, and some of them are in the room here today, that has been working together for over a decade. I'm probably the longest standing member of that group. And I will say to you that it's been very productive for us to share notes across counties, and I really strongly encourage that that continue as we find ourselves in situations as Orange County has. But I will tell you that this was a somewhat intentional situation for us. Let me start by saying that when I arrived it was Memorial Day of 2016, it was an election going on with one of our board members in the City of Santa Ana Council. As is typical, our board office didn't follow his talking points during his KFI news radio station and ended up saying that he would open a vacant bus terminal across the street from the Hall of Administration as a homeless shelter. This was within the first 90 days of my arrival in Orange County. I thanked him wholeheartedly. Because when I got there to the County of Orange in the Civic Center between the county seat of government, the county superior court, and the city of Santa Ana, there were 461 people encamped in that area. It was the human tragedy that we're all referring to here. It was very significant. The criminal element, the vulnerability, the disabled. It was a visual that it was just untenable for the people that work for the county, work for the city, and go and attend jury duty, right? This is what we were reading in the newspaper. So I thanked him for opening the bus terminal, and I redesigned that into a transitional regional hub for homeless people that currently serves between 400 and 425 people nightly. The county did not fund any of the food provisions. We basically redirected all the faith-based groups that were providing, feeding in parks and civic center and everything else, and we redirected them to be part of the solution by coming into the courtyard, welcoming them, talking to them about safe food handling through our public health department, and getting them to work with us on the solution for homelessness. Wildly successful initiative. If any of you are interested in a tour, I recommend it. It's a very unique facility. There's not another one like it in the country. So that was the first thing I did. And then in October, that was October 5th we opened that, 30 days. I opened it on the 29th day because I wanted to be an overachiever. Come October 18th, I delivered an assessment to the Board of Supervisors basically to let them know what was wrong in Orange County and what we needed to do about it. It wasn't a 10-year plan to end homelessness. It wasn't a solution to homelessness. It was what was wrong right now and what are we going to do to turn the corner and course correct. So with that, basically I established we needed to hire a couple of positions because what was happening in the County of Orange is that we were very good, we talk about subpopulations, we were very good at addressing family homelessness. All of our programs, 90% of the programs in the County of Orange were directed at single women, single mothers, pregnant people, and families with children. The only services we had in the County of Orange for individuals were our seasonal armories. That was the problem. So the courtyard opened. People thought no one's going in there. That's a bus terminal. And a bus terminal is a wind tunnel. It's intended to be an open air space to move the diesel fuel out, right, the fumes. It was a perfect location for a group that had been encamped in the Civic Center for 2 years, 5 years, 8 years prior to my arrival. It's been a very significant piece of our system of care. It was the initial one. I will say to you that they also had, while I was doing that, I was also designing a program called the Kramer Center up in North County in Anaheim. And this was a 10-year initiative that when I was in Long Beach in 2005, I did a tour with a board of supervisors from Orange County, 2005. When I arrived in Orange County in 2016, it hadn't opened yet. That was supposed to be the first emergency shelter multi-service center for the homeless, and it again was being designed to serve families. So I went into the design room and we were looking at the floor plans, and I said, I'm sorry everybody, and I know that you told your communities that we were going to serve families, but we just can't do that. We have a crisis upon us and we need to serve individuals first, and when we're done doing that, we will return to serve the families that need our help. There was no pushback on that. We designed the program to serve individuals. We opened it in phases. The Board of Supervisors said, let's open that up quickly. We put 100 people into one side of the building while we constructed the other side. So that was going on. Then we also applied to the state for the whole person care pilot. Many of our counties around the table have that. Serendipitous made me look great. I was so happy to have the whole person care pilot come down because I basically was a medical social worker in my prior career, working in emergency rooms, dealing with law enforcement and fire, bringing homeless people into our emergency rooms. So I had I'd say probably 6 years doing that, which is part of my 25-year tenure in homelessness. I have experience in all sectors of this issue and its impact on our communities. So with that, whole person care was a beautiful thing. EMS high utilizers. So we wrapped up 5 of our hospitals. The County of Orange does not have a county health center, does not have a county hospital. So, you know, the hospitals are basically the emergency rooms are the detox programs. I know that across, in my experience, and I can't speak for everyone in the room, but I can tell you one thing that we severely lack in our system of care is effective detox drug and alcohol programs.
We have none in Kern County, not one.
When I got to Orange County, they said they contracted 2 beds from Long Beach. My head hit the desk, and I said, wow, because I came from Long Beach, and we had 14 there, and you're telling me that 2 out of 14 are being contracted to a county of 3.2 million people. So drug and alcohol, rehab, detox, you know, we hear about the rehab Riviera. You know, there's all of this, you know, in California with the exchange for Medi-Cal that people get basically flown to California to get their rehab needs met. It's private sector, it's also Medi-Cal. Well, some Medicare fraud has been discovered through a segment that was done in the OC register, and some people are now serving time as a result of Medicare fraud on those rehab Riviera programs. That's a whole separate meeting. I won't go into that today. But the whole person care pilot, we found out that there was money left on the table at the state, that not everybody around the table here had applied for all of it. So we went back for a second round. We applied for Whole Person Care 2. Whole Person Care 2 is basically to serve the high utilizers of the emergency medical system out of the Courtyard. The Courtyard is that 400-bed bus terminal. Courtyard named after the San Antonio model. If any of you have ever been out to San Antonio, just a quick note on that, Supervisor Spitzer brought me out to San Antonio with a group of mental health professionals, and we saw this beautiful campus, Haven for Hope, and you know, basically a healthcare response with mental health and detox and some permanent supportive housing. And I got back in the plane on the way back and I said, are you prepared to implement that in Orange County? Because that's what every county truly needs, is the ability to triage mental health and drug and alcohol in one location and have it not be in an emergency room where people are receiving medical care, because there's a very different type of specialized care required in crisis stabilization for mental health and drug and alcohol. I strongly believe that, and it comes from my healthcare experience that I share that with you. Additionally, on the correction side, our sheriff and one of our board of supervisors, Spitzer, came forward with the Stepping Up initiative, which was our initiative to address mental health recidivism in the jails. You can see how all of this is a cross thread of the very same thing. It's like if we can address our homelessness, well, let me just say this, if we can address mental health, and we can address corrections, and we can address addictions, you will have solved about 40% of my homeless problem. And the issue that we address with affordable housing and availability and all of that, that's one piece of it, but we've got so much more going on in our healthcare system, our mental health, and our correctional re-entry. I want to say that Prop 47 was implemented after our 2015 homeless counts. When we talk about our continuum of care systems, that many of our counties are systems, Long Beach was its own continuum. After the 2015 count, I go to Washington, D.C. every year, and I was talking to the federal HUD folks, and they said, we need you to quantify the impacts of Prop 47. So I asked all of our counties, and every one of them, basically from Santa Barbara to San Diego, it was L.A., Riverside, San Bernardino, Orange County, can't remember which other ones, Ventura. We all added a question to our 2017 homeless counts about the impacts of Prop 47, and the results were basically the same across the board, that about 28%, 25 to 28% of our unsheltered population in 2017 homeless count were released from prison that year, state prison. So we had, you know, out of Orange County, 2,500 unsheltered people, 750 of them came from a correctional tributary. So, you know, what's happening in our communities is that, you know, you go back to the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, what is the history of homelessness and the narrative and what does it look like? You know, we're not just talking about a disabled population, a vulnerable population. You splay on top of that a criminal, low-level, nonviolent criminal, you know, with a drug history or drug issues, and with law enforcement that's had a pretty significant tool taken out of their toolbox, our constituencies are going sideways. So, and the reason why, too, I mean, the narrative has been really polarizing, counterproductive to solutions to address homelessness. And depending on which angle you're at, I mean, certainly in Orange County, it's very difficult to talk about the national strategy for housing first when the narrative on our streets is the Santa Ana flood control. So I'm going to shift to that real quick.
You know, if you wouldn't mind for 1 second, thank you for your presentation. It really is masterful. In Bakersfield recently, I of course serve the county, so the Bakersfield has a separate jurisdiction. There was a lot of hoopla around an encampment, essentially, that had formed on some property in the city. And it was so striking that this group of homeless people had elected a mayor, they had elected they had public safety officials. Sure. There was a lease office. I understand some of those truths are in place in Orange County as well. And I am really fascinated by that reality. I think there are some assets here within a lot of folks that find themselves in these places that are quite valuable and that we are not thinking about when we think about this remarkable challenge that has to include the input, insight, and expertise of actual homeless people. So I'm stricken by that. The city of Bakersfield came in and wiped everybody out with no real answer, frankly, no real solution, and now it's less of an eyesore as you're passing down this popular corridor, but it has done nothing to solve the problem. And it has broken up what was a relatively cohesive and somewhat functional entity. Of course, we can't allow that, but there are aspects and elements of that I'm fascinated by. Curious your thoughts on that issue, only if you can get to it, because you have much bigger issues to address with us first, and we do have limited time. Can you talk to us about the lawsuit and bring us up to speed?
Okay. Basically, when we created the courtyard, and there were 461 in the Civic Center, and we got a lot of people into the courtyard, but Santa Ana started really enforcing the Civic Center to say, hey, there's a place for you to go, so you can't stay here. You need to go to the courtyard. And, you know, the homeless population that wasn't interested in the courtyard basically left the Civic Center, went up to the flood control channel to join a group of other folks that were already there. And from that, as it started to kind of force multiply on the flood control channel, and this is, a visible location off the 57-522 Orange Crush area, if any of you have been there, I mean, you can see this thing as it continued to metastasize along that flood control channel. We also heard, and some even confirmed for us, that cities in the surrounding area enforcing their ordinances in their cities, homeless folks were going up to the flood control channel because, of course, there's no infrastructure there, there's no law enforcement. It's a bike trail and it's a flood control channel, so there's really not a lot of accountability in a place like that. So it continued to grow. The board basically allocated $750,000 for a nonprofit to be out there 7 days a week. We were out there for 7 months, and we were able to exit 250 people voluntarily into programs. This is basically the initiative, and what we all really need to be doing is, you can lead with your law enforcement, but you've got to connect people to service first. You've got to basically say to people, there is a resource available to you right now, and you can go to it. And if you choose not to go to it, that's that thing, your right to self-determination, but you can't be here. And in order to say that or truly enforce that, you do have to have a viable place for them to go. So we were out there doing that for about 7 months, and we ended up with a population of about 300 that basically said to our outreach teams, pound sand, we're not going anywhere, we're living off the land, we're protected by our advocacy and by our lawyers. Basically, the condition of homelessness allows us to be protected and we can stay here. So what we did was this is the intentionalness of this. We said, okay, well, on this date, and we set a date, relatively arbitrary, January 29th, we're going to go in and do a maintenance project, and God bless you. And with that, we are going to voluntarily go on your own, go to the services that we're providing, or we're going to hold you accountable for trespassing on a flood control district. We set parks hours because it is a bike recreational trail, which the video has all gone viral. You've probably seen that. Watch the video now. There's not a single tent in the entire stretch, 380 miles of flood control in Orange County. But with that, they filed a lawsuit on us and said, you can't just displace people and send them out into our communities. You've got to have a place for them to go. We said, we've got vacancy in many of our programs. Our armories are not full. We've got places for folks. They won't go.
Who filed the lawsuit?
It was the Elder Law Disability Center, Legal Center. It was not the ACLU. And this group has Carol Sobel on their team. If any of you know who Carol Sobel is, she's relatively famous and mentoring some of our Orange County lawyers. She's the one that has a history of suing Los Angeles for the last decade and really has made a career on civil rights litigation. She's mentoring a woman in Santa Ana for the Elder Law Disability Center. And so she's kind of been guiding this process. But I got to say to you that, regardless of what you may see in the media spin, the judge has been very productive with us. I've never seen a judge come in and hold the advocates accountable, hold the homeless folks accountable, to say, you can't live like this, this isn't acceptable, it's not healthy for you. And from my vantage point, being, the strongest homeless advocate you'll ever meet, I think we're perpetuating long-term homelessness by allowing folks to live out there and say that that's acceptable and okay. We're trying to provide services to them. We have beds available. We have mental health programs. We have recuperative care and whole person care. We've got all kinds of things available. People have the right to self-determination. So the judge had asked me on one day, do you think this is going to be a precedent? And I said, I believe it is, because we are standing at the corner of a person's right to self-determination and accountability in public spaces. Because our communities want to see accountability in public spaces. And we in government, not just government doesn't solve this alone, as we've heard, private sector, business sector, healthcare system, and law enforcement. We all need to be working together to solve this. I've got the second in charge of the Irvine Company, if any of you know Bren, one of the richest men in the country. His second in command is on my commission, And I brought him together with the guy who runs a trash company, believe it or not, who's basically committed over $100 million in legacy Orange County family resources and revenue for us to pull ourselves into the 34 cities, creating 2,700 units permanent supportive housing to effectively address this. So that's kind of our long-term strategy. But I want to say that we went forward to motel what we thought was up to 400 people for a minimum of 30 days to get them off the flood control channel so that we could do our maintenance project and bring that public land back to conditions. We took out 400 tons of debris, 14,000 hypodermic needles, you know, all that goes on and on and on about why that was unacceptable, inappropriate, and not accountability. And so that got cleared. We motel vouchered 700 people. Okay, there were only 300 there. We ended up moteling 700 people, and on one morning, my boss and I, who's the CEO for the County of Orange, stood there while the advocates Ubered homeless people from all over the county into the flood control so that they would get the 30-day motel voucher. We motel vouchered every one of them. So last night was the last night of our motel vouchering, and I'll tell you, the 34 cities were so mad at us. And we didn't know where they were going. We were going to every motel that had a vacancy, you know, and if I checked into that motel, I wouldn't have to ask the city if it was okay for me to go into that motel. But they wanted to know where every homeless person was. They wanted their names. They wanted everything from us, and we gave them nothing. What we told them as cities, because of HIPAA and the mental health and the assessments that we were doing on all of these people, is that we will let you know how many exits we have from your city and not tell you locations. We had constituents with picket signs standing in front of the motels because they figured out which ones they were. And motel owners were being picketed as a result of assisting the homeless population. So it was very challenging. And, you know, I want to say that as I said to my friends in Ventura, this was a population, remember, that over 7 months did not access anything. They felt protected by the advocacy and by their legal, protections. But at the end of the day, about 35%, and this is tentative data, I don't have the final results from last night, about 35% ended up in something productive that was different than, you know, their homelessness. And so I'll say wildly successful, believe it or not, that this 700 group, we were able to reach all of them in some way, shape, or form and actually change the trajectory on 35% of them. So the precedent here is that the judge has set no orders on us. It's all been voluntary with a big stick, but voluntary. And that what's actually happening that you probably don't read in the news, this big debacle on the county putting 3 sites forward, right? It was Irvine, Huntington Beach, and Laguna Niguel. And those communities just lost it, okay? They brought 14 buses of people to our board meeting on Tuesday. But with that, they need to understand that these are just county properties that are CEQA cleared to create a shelter, a temporary structure on. Not a city has come forward with any other alternate or appropriate site anywhere in the county. Mm-hmm. I met with the cities yesterday and basically got a flat no on providing a shelter anywhere in the county. So it's come to our attention that it's the county that needs to put the front end of the system together, as I mentioned, but the back end of the system, they're coming to realize that they have the land use authority to create the housing that's needed to exit folks from our shelter system, from that front end of the system into permanent supportive housing. And as the narrative has shifted, I think the constituency is really struggling to provide housing after the narrative that has been created by a flood control population that's resistant to service, potentially because the system of care is not wrapped around serving them. And I'll wrap up with what I said at the very outset. Remember, we were only serving families in Orange County when I got there. We have 600 beds now from Kramer and Courtyard And the whole system of care, that continuum of care, is basically got such barriers to serving this population that my recommendation to my board, and really it's a good recommendation for all of us, if you can get a surplus of beds anywhere in your county, then you can address self-determination and public accountability in your communities. Your cities will be able to enforce their laws if you've got somewhere for folks to go that can accommodate women, couples, veterans, pets. Pets has been a big issue. We've bought more kennels in the last 90 days than ever. I mean, it's been amazing. We've accommodated every animal in our programs, but our system of care has never accounted for animals, or 90 days clean and sober, which basically doesn't address that population at all. It takes the homeless population right off the table if we've got barriers in our programs. So we're taking a very hard look at our system. We're talking to our providers, we're talking to our cities to try to get to a place where our response matches the needs of the population that's impacting our community. And that is a very difficult dialogue to have.
That's a good one.
A beautiful reminder that the individual does matter, right? Who is at the helm, philosophy, paradigm, and heart, basically, really impacts policy discussion and policy effectiveness. We have only a few minutes left, but I'd love to field some questions from the crowd. You've heard quite a bit about two counties' approaches. One has been more steadily evolving, the other has been quick, at least in terms of the what we have heard about it. What a fascinating insight from you to know more about what we've only read in the headlines. I feel that I have...
Don't believe everything you read.
I only got a small piece from the headlines. Shocking, right? Any questions for the three panelists here? Love to hear some engagement. Do we have a microphone at the back, or are we going to use this one? Okay, here we go. Let me just hand you mine.
Sure. Thank you, ma'am. Susan, maybe it was Tom or Susan, you used the word triage, which I think is critical at this juncture. So with the reentry population, for example, how well have you engaged probation with their 109 funds, looking at their housing sources?
Part of my role in sitting in the CEO's office is that I conduct an interdepartmental meeting monthly, and probation is very active. In fact, probation has been part of our outreach team on the flood control channel. So we've got our healthcare agency, behavioral health, we've got the sheriff out there, we've got our nonprofits out there, and then we've got probation out there. Probation is also working with us throughout our shelter system to, they have resources. They're not just the stick. They also have resources. And so, we've brought everyone to the table and incorporated them into interdisciplinary teams. And the Prop 47 thing, I started to say it earlier that, this was impacting us in the beginning of 2015. We just got a Prop 47 grant, which is 3 years later. They've already been re-entered. But, the reentry programs are a critical component. We're citing a 24/7 reentry center in Santa Ana where our jail is, so that they don't take on a disproportionate amount of the homeless folks being removed from the prisons at midnight.
What is your biggest hurdle in Orange County moving forward today?
Oh my goodness.
Can you identify one, or is it still too big?
I'm going to say at this moment, it's the narrative. That's the most painful thing that we deal with. And, perception is reality. It doesn't matter what the facts are. It doesn't matter how good you're doing or how your programs are operating. The perception is really difficult to manage. And, I'm going to blame social media. In this climate and culture, social media is really not helping us, because a lot of information gets pushed out there, and it's perception information. It's not facts. And so it's really difficult to convince people, when you've got facts, what's happening. It's difficult.
For me, you have dramatically shifted the narrative from what I understood. The conversation, of course, is easily had in put-downs about NIMBYs or wealthy Orange County or partisan divides. And you're right, that is not helpful. And it is the way in which I've thought about the issue based on the headlines. And, how have you combat that, or are you still working on that strategy? And how should we think about shifting that narrative?
Here's what I'm doing, because, I've been working in Orange County I'm coming up on my 2-year anniversary, and we've made tremendous progress. I can't think of a jurisdiction that's moved the needle faster. The board's completely engaged. When you talk about political will, we've definitely got it. We've also got resources, financial resources and staffing resources, but a lot of my efforts and even the things that are behind the scenes that I'm still negotiating are coming out in the courtroom, and that is bothering me a little bit. So what I have decided to do is a special session of the Board of Supervisors on April 17th. You can tune into that online. And I will be basically leveling the field to let everybody know what we are doing, and engaging the entire community to watch that or be present as I bring all 34 cities into the room to go to the mic to talk about what they're willing to commit. So I'm lining up the public comment as well as my presentation to talk about the progress that we've made on mental health, criminal justice, housing, and homelessness. Those are my main themes that I'm going to be talking about. And then I'm going to address the judge who will be watching. I assure you, he watches all of our tapes. And then the community, the 34 cities and the stakeholders, my private sector folks will come up and make their commitments public. And it'll be in our boardroom instead of the courtroom.
Sure.
Well, I'll be your first campaign volunteer when you run for governor.
That'll never
How does that
happen.
sound? Any other questions here? We have about 5 minutes left. Do you have the microphone, or you got it? Great.
Thank you. My question is for Tom. You mentioned about the real estate agents helping out. Maybe you can provide a few more thoughts on the role with respect to deposits being paid for units, reference checks on these future tenants, and addressing the landlord biases when these tenants come in.
What a great
and any
question.
on-site support services.
Yeah, that was some of the difficulty that we initially came across when we started the HIP program. Luckily, it had evolved as a result of our advisory board, which was created by our Board of Supervisors, led by our CEO. And so one of the impediments that also was noted was the enhanced security deposits, damages to the facilities. Could there be a pocket of money that can address that in conjunction with this landlord reach out unit? And they actually did that. The board committed some funding as well as uniquely using their emergency solutions grant funds in order to do enhanced security deposits to assist with public utilities as well as to have a fund in case there was any damage to the unit that the landlord could then use. Every person who is part of that housing search and stability group, their function is to be honest and open with the landlords. They let them know the people that we're going to be dealing with primarily are those who are very high risk. They have a lot of issues. Obviously, many of them probably have had expulsions from many previous living arrangements. They have past history of issues in their case. So they're honest with the landlord. They tell them this. They let them know that. But the intent is when you move that person in there, you're just not the agency is not just moving the homeless person in to a housing and saying, here you go, good luck, and we'll see you. It's the intense case management, the wraparound services that are supposed to be there. Right now, everyone is focusing, it's a housing first approach, and I know housing first is difficult, but housing first, actually the idea and concept of it is to have no barriers. So if a person for some reason goes back and uses marijuana, obviously that's not good, but that shouldn't be a reason to necessarily kick them out of housing, but the case management should be there to address those issues with that tenant, because obviously we want that tenant to be a good tenant, and so that for that to continue. So, but it is not to punish them for slips that all of us have. And so I think being honest and upfront with the landlord is very important. And then the fact that they are connecting, and the landlord is not doing this alone. If the landlord has any issues, they contact our HIP squad. And if they also have any issues with the tenant, they also are aware of the provider that's there to provide them services. So it's a joint effort. It's an effort not only with the HIP squad and the housing provider, but also we meet regularly through various agencies. We have every county or continuum of care has a coordinated entry system. We do case conferencing on a regular basis where we share information and some of the obstacles we have and try to deal with that in order to make sure that we keep that person in housing as best as possible. As with anything, we do have people that fall out of the system. We do have recidivism. But right now we've been managing to keep that around about 12%, which I think is pretty good.
I just wanted to add something. I'm Darby Kernan with CSAC. We actually have a letter, and I'll pass it out to everybody, but we've asked for $1.3 billion from the state budget, and one of the programs that we're trying to get funding for is a landlord liaison program, which is very similar to what you're doing. San Diego's doing it as well, where there's somebody 24/7 that a landlord can contact that works for the county, that they can, if they're having any problems with the tenants. And one of the things is you can ask for all this money to build the housing that we desperately need, but that takes time. And so you kind of have to figure out ways to create existing housing that's already built. And so that's one of the ways. So we have this letter asking for $1.3 billion, but CSAC's also worked with the League of Cities over the last year and a half on a homelessness task force and trying to figure out best practices and kind of creating a toolkit for cities and counties to use to address homelessness. And so we have copies of that as well that we'll put out here so everybody could get some information.
I'm fascinated by what's happening in Salt Lake City, infill, mixed-use housing with commercial opportunities and being sort of a real creative land use modeling that we see going on in places around the country that are thinking quickly for it needs now innovatively. I'm going to ask my panel 30 seconds, please, each. One thing you want this body to take away from your comments today. 30 seconds, and then we're done. Anybody ready?
I'll go.
Okay, Susan.
I'm just going to say two things that I didn't say earlier. Number one is I'm a strong proponent of motel conversions in communities that are single-family homes. It's been something that's gained traction in Orange County. We have 5 of them right now. 2 of them have opened and the other 3 are being renovated. When you've got a blighted motel and you can turn that into 70 units of housing quickly, it's a beautiful thing, and you get a nonprofit involved, and what you can do with encampment populations who've created their own de facto communities is one of our initiatives with the Civic Center is we opened in the Orchard, which is a 70-unit motel converted, and put like probably 40 people from that encampment in there. Then they now support and take care of each other. The other thing that I want to say is that we created, I created regional service planning areas, and I know in LA there are 8 spas. Everybody loves it when I talk about the spa, but I'm actually talking about service planning areas. And I didn't do it by board district, I did it by service. So there are 3 of those, and there are 5 board of supervisors, and that works very well to allow us to coordinate our county services with our community-based services. And if we can get to a place where we can manage our beds through our homeless management information system and do an inventory of where the beds are in your county, where the homeless people are in your county, and create a match that works, finding that sweet spot and that balance, then you can begin to make informed decisions about how to allocate your resources to make sure that you're covering the county's needs as effectively as possible.
Gentlemen?
Mine is probably going to be very simple. Ownership, I think, is one of the big issues. One of the things that we've done is we've been very specific in working with, because the county knows it's not just the county. We know it's part of our community-based and all of our faith-based organizations, but we've been also understanding and communicating directly with all of our cities, our 24 cities. About half of them actually sit on our governing council for our continuum of care. So they're making decisions that are directly affecting the funding for the services in their own communities. And I think that's really what we need, is to be honest with them, to be open with them. If they have any issues, to frankly answer them. And so that has been very useful for us, is in cultivating the relationships with our communities and just educating them and providing the information for them so they could know what's going on, and not necessarily try to do it in a silo. And then many of the items that we actually have, like, and Susan mentioned it earlier, we routinely, all of the continuums of care from Ventura, San Diego, Long Beach, Pasadena, Glendale, San Bernardino, Riverside, Kern, all of us actually meet on a regular basis twice a year. We call it our Continuum of Care Alliance, where we share best practices. If I would encourage you to connect with your local continuums of care if you don't know who they are, because I listened to Susan and I've gotten a lot of, as a matter of fact, I called Susan this morning right before coming. I have her on speed dial. So we communicate with each other quite often and share what's working and what's not working. And then we bring this back to our decision makers and those who are within our systems that can actually make those changes that can help move us forward.
Supervisor Ramos is the former president of the Latino Caucus of CSAC. For our annual meeting this year and workshop, our topic will be homelessness.
That's right.
It is that paramount, it is that profound, that this will be our topic for Latino Caucus, and I'm hoping Susan will sit on my panel. If she'll strongly consider that. Any pressure y'all can provide, I'd
Is it
appreciate.
located in Hawaii?
Yeah, we'll work on that. James, in closing.
Well, thank you. And I think, the topics that we've heard, certainly being able to continue the political and civic will of the communities and reaching one another, but also following the priorities and the resources that are available from the federal, state grants that are there, ensuring that the resources are there, but also targeting the subpopulations, continuing to do that here in San Bernardino County. But also, building collaboration doesn't end at the boundaries of county jurisdictions. The collaboration that's been built here in San Bernardino County, the Inland Empire, that collaboration needs to continue through all 58 counties here in the state of California. As we see Orange County moving forward, addressing these issues, we need to be in collaboration with them, showing support also and learning from the challenges that they're going through, and to let them know that we're here with them through these tough times. It's one thing to say that we need to have collaboration within a county, within a jurisdiction, but it's another thing to say here at CSAC and the different counties that are represented that we are a team and we're moving forward in collaboration and seeing what's going on in the state, seeing how counties are challenged with the homelessness issue, and the moment they start to move forward, the challenges that come and hit them, similar to the local areas as far as trying to get housing for homeless veterans, and we hit the NIMBYism that comes forward. It's no different than when cities start to come forward and say, hey, wait a minute, we need to see ID, we need to see who's coming into our city. Well, no, wait a minute. If we're all seriously talking about homelessness as being the #1 issue in the state of California, then we all have a role to play, and that collaboration begins here, it begins in the state, and the boundaries do not have an impact on that collaboration that needs to be built.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.